All right, welcome everyone. I hope you're all awake this afternoon. Today we really have a very different type of presentation. Here at the ARC forums, we often lead with technology. However, remember, we often talk about people, process, and technology. But you notice people come first in that, then the process, then the technology. And very often in this world we live in, it's always, technology can fix everything. So we apply the technology, then secondarily, we go and create business processes that adapt, and we somewhat force fit them to the technology. And then lastly, we say, staff, folks, here you go. You adapt to it. Well, that obviously violates that sequence of people, process, and technology. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So we're here to talk about human-centric manufacturing digital transformation. What are our objectives for today? We're going to apply real-life applications of human-centric culture in life sciences organizations. Number two, we'll be analyzing a truly very important framework for identifying and harnessing those cultural attributes for digital transformation success. Next, we'll be discussing and developing some knowledge and the skills for leveraging that framework technology. We'll discuss the background and the themes of this human-centric manufacturing study. And lastly, we'll be examining use cases, applications, and even consider actions for the challenges that still exist after you apply the framework. So, first up is Rachelle Howard. She's the Director of Manufacturing, Systems Automation, and Digital Strategy at Vertex Pharmaceuticals, a global biotechnology company that invests in scientific innovation to create transformative medicines for people with serious and life-threatening diseases. And she'll be talking about Vertex and their perspective on both the industry and the larger ecosystem, challenges facing Vertex, and the steps they've taken to build a human-centric manufacturing culture, the impact of taking all those steps, and her thoughts on the future and challenges that remain for Vertex and likely for similar organizations in the domain. So please join me in welcoming Rachelle Howard.
All right, thank you all. So I am Rachelle Howard with Vertex Pharmaceuticals, and just want to start off by sharing with you all a little bit more about Vertex as well. And so at Vertex, we are a global biotechnology company. We do invest in these transformative medicines for our patients. They are at the heart of everything we do. We strike at the core of the disease. We aren't just giving treatments, we're actually looking at not only how we manipulate the underlying cause of the disease, but in some cases actually delivering cures. Science is incredibly advanced. We've been the first for many things at Vertex, and it's a really exciting company to be at. And so I'm sharing also a little bit about our corporate strategy, because this drives what we do and how we operate. And so much of what Vertex gets back in revenue, we put back into R&D operations. And when I joined Vertex back 2014, we were making under $1 billion in revenue. And we had around 2,000 employees. Yesterday, we announced our last year's revenue, and we are now at $11 billion. It's enormous growth over the last several years. And our employee base has only grown to just under 6,000. So we're actually operating very lean as well in how we are really delivering these medications to patients. But the investment back into R&D and being able to move quickly and deliver is core to the success that Vertex has had. And further, so I'm sharing a lot of our corporate slides around our R&D strategy because that is so much of what makes Vertex what we are. And I fully recognize this is a manufacturing forum and environment and industrial manufacturing focus. And so just want to kind of tie these pieces together to highlight that investment back in R&D needs to feed into our manufacturing strategy. Our internal manufacturing sites are an extension of our development. This is how we get products out and launched by leveraging this internal flexibility, shared strategy, and not having been so dependent on our commercial manufacturing operations. Once we have something launched, we can outsource it. But our internal manufacturing, while we do have to produce for commercial, our strategy has to be, how do we move the development pipeline? How do we stay flexible, agile? How do we be ready for all the clinical products that need to come through our internal manufacturing sites? And also in our culture at Vertex. So this all plays into how we really drive our teams and what we want our teams thinking about in this human-centric approach. So at Vertex, we do work hard to really strive for innovation in our science. We are relentless in our approaches. We make sure that we debate hard, that we want to have the best, most accurate information presented to our team so we can make decisions and move forward as one. And this culture really drives how we operate and the speed with which we need to move through all aspects of the company. And while Vertex has had many firsts and very kind of cool deliveries and kind of even cures using CRISPR and gene editing, our most exciting release as of late for this year was the approval of Journavax. And so those of you who invest in the stock market may have heard of this also because it's a pretty huge development where Journavax is the first non-opioid pain treatment. And this was just released and we're the first to do this. It's been over a 20-year journey for Vertex, but leveraging our expertise in cystic fibrosis and treatment along sodium channels can convert that into this delivery mechanism that doesn't impact our central nervous system, is non-addictive, non-opioid pain treatment. So Vertex is moving fast in a lot of different markets, and our manufacturing sites are trying to keep pace. It's important for our manufacturing teams to recognize that we help to produce some of the clinical batches to support this journey. All right, and so now a little bit about me and kind of where I fit into this puzzle. So my background is chemical engineering, and then from grad school. In grad school, I was focused on process control and controller performance analysis, a lot of data analysis. Coming out of school, went into pharma, looking at best practices and site engineering operations. But because of that process control background, quickly was drawn into an automation team at the pharma site I was at. And so working through automation, understanding that, coming to Vertex, working on our first of kind, commercial approved continuous manufacturing system. Had a lot of experiences to draw from and always looking out to industry. Vertex was very small. There's not a lot to learn from an automation engineering perspective, when at the time I was the only one. So reaching out and seeing what are other companies doing and how are they growing. From there, had an opportunity when our site started to mature beyond just being stood up by a development organization and truly turned into an actual manufacturing organization, had an opportunity to help kick off our digital transformation program. So I come in with this perspective of a chemical engineering background, automation background, and just trying to use practical approaches to solving problems in our digital transformation. All right, so as we approach our digital transformation, as Jim was saying, we factor in people, process, and technology. And while there's many folks who came here to learn about technology, we also consistently hear throughout all the stories, people are the hard part. And people need to be along for us in the journey. And it's not just about getting the user interface right, so that there's a little intuitiveness to how we click the buttons. They need to want to change. They need to see the big picture and where we're going and the vision of our operations. And so we really need to take people along on that journey. And this is what we're going to chat about a little bit more here today. And I shared my background and how I'm coming from an engineering background. And show of hands, who else here has an engineering degree? A lot of hands. All right, and how many here have sociology or psychology degrees? Okay, so we have one. And that is definitely part of our challenge. As it was noted earlier in one of the talks, what do you say? It said our engineers are not known for their charm offensive. Like, we're not really great at winning people over in our approaches to how we sell the projects. And so this is something that we actually need to try harder on to be successful in our projects. And we can tap into all kinds of learnings. There are all kinds of books out there that many of you maybe have picked up. The How to Win Friends and Influence People, some of the Brené Brown books. There's 1,000 out there that can help us try to think like other people think. It's just for our engineers in the crowd, not always the most intuitive ways to work, but really important to tap into and understand. All right, so for our Vertex journey, I just want to share a little further about some of our challenges. That manufacturing site that we now run and does do commercial operations as well as clinical and late stage development, it was really started out of development teams, formulation development, analytical development, standing this up. Highly paper-based, very few systems and kind of legacy systems that have been patchworked, built to kind of support the operations, but not built intentionally knowing we were going into commercial operations. So we had some pain points there just around working with what we started with and the immaturity of our sites. But there is also a recognition that the brute force that it took to run these operations, the lean teams that we have, the desire to have access to data, we weren't going to get there with continuing on the paper-based systems. Far too many pain points and time wasted for our teams just in all the grunt work, manual transcriptions, the reviews, and hundreds upon 100 pages of batch records being passed hand to hand to be able to get through just the release of a product, which is not practical. So while we had very cool technologies like continuous manufacturing, we can do a real-time release with the testing of our process, we're still left with paper at the end of the day, and somebody's going to pass this around and have to approve it and sign it off and scan it into our document management system, and too many gaps to make this really an efficient process. We also have the challenge that many of you have probably as well, but balancing those investments in technology with the investments in our people. So how do we make sure that we're not just selling the idea of a technology, but yet we have nobody who really has the right skills to run it, that our teams aren't ready to pick it up and adopt it, that our teams aren't overwhelmed by trying to do an investigation on a system that we don't understand. We need to bring people along for the journey and make sure we're investigating not only on how we just do the day-to-day training of their mindset and the skills to work through the workflows of the system, but are they understanding what it's all about and the point of it and where we're headed and why the data they're entering matters. Like, there's a bigger picture that needs to be factored in. And then lastly, as I said, Vertex highly focused on R&D. The tools out there often are built for commercial operations, and that isn't quite the right fit for us. So being very systematic and thoughtful in our approach to evaluating our process and how we're implementing these systems to make sure that they can actually work for our teams was a critical piece as well. So we can't just plug in a tool that's built to just make the same widget day after day. That's not how we operate. We need the flexibility for the next commercial operation to be able to change parameters. When the development team says the next batch, we have to make it a little bit differently, that the specifications for the drug have changed a little bit. Our testing needs to align with that. We need to make sure that we have more of an agile approach as we're going through this. So you can't just hand the same tool to every site and every team and expect it to work. So I'm going to share a little bit more on what we found to work as we're going through and a few things that haven't worked or just need some support still. And so we're going to talk about setting the vision, sharing the journey, and upskilling. So on this piece of setting the vision, there are so many incredible speakers here at Art Forum. We hear through the keynotes, we get inspired, and we need our leaders to be getting inspired and having a clear path. Where is it that we're headed at the end of the day? Because our teams are being asked to change how they do things, get out of their comfort zone, who've moved my cheese, this is not how I'm used to working. If they know where they're headed and why, it becomes a little bit easier to adjust to the change, to hear those repeat messages from our leadership that say, here's the big picture. At Vertex, we have Vertex 2030, how we want to operate in the future. These changes are what are going to help us get there. Make sure that they're telling the right story of, this is how we're aiming to solve your pain points. Make sure that they're heard. If it's not solving the right pain points, make sure that they are in communication and have the opportunity to really understand, how does that vision apply to me and my job and where we're going? And those leaders also need to be paying attention to, how do we want to operate? So we talk a lot about AI throughout the conferences, and what do we want AI to do? And what is that maturity level? Is it that I actually want it to be autonomous and execute for me and sort of replace the way that we're doing our operations now? Or is my vision just that I want to make it easier for people to do what they're already doing and just have more of those assistants, present the data to them so they can focus on the analysis and the decision making, and not to actually just take their job out of their hands. Most of our leaders, even if they don't have a clear vision, they know what they don't want. And what they don't want is our people to be out of the loop. We trust in our scientists. They're who have been so successful in delivering many products to patients. We want to make sure that their lives are just easier, but not that we're replacing them. So we're really looking for those leaders to be the inspiration for our teams and bring everybody along on this journey. And there's different levels of the journey. There's that big picture where we need to have people know overall where we're headed. And then there's the journey of, this specific team is going to be impacted by this specific technology change. And how do we go from how we operate today to how we're going to operate in a few months when this program, this system rolls out? And so at that bigger scale and for the bigger picture, we're looking at, how do we get people's voices heard? How do we include them in the process to make sure that it's not something that's happening to them, but it's something that our teams are part of the journey and that they're happening with them? So we held things like summits and having small work groups come back and give their feedback, what's working, what's not, doing those check-ins and making sure that the voice of all the different teams is factored in has been critical to helping people feel like they have a chance to ask questions, to really understand the vision. If they haven't quite been paying attention along the way, they start to clue in because they've been included in that discussion. We make sure that it's not just senior leaders and then the operators impacted, but really all the middle managers as well. They're joining these summits and understanding, why are things changing for my team? Maybe my team's going to the workshops, they're designing this, but we do often have that kind of frozen middle manager level where they're not included. So going to team meetings, having town halls, having outreach events where everybody's starting to get the picture of what we're changing, it's been really important. And it's not without extra work, and it's not without having to sell people on the funding that it takes to hold these extra events and have the support that it takes to operate in this way. But it makes a huge difference to people not just getting an email and hearing like, oh God, my process is changing tomorrow, I have to do new training, to like actually being excited for the change. And that drives the adoption and helps us to get the value at the end of the day. But then that's the big picture. The other part of the journey is at that system level and the implementations. And so going to the people is incredibly important, because if my process is going to change, I need to know why. And if I'm telling you that this isn't going to work, you need to know why. And so some of these projects were started up and run during COVID. One particular challenge we faced, probably a couple of teams, but one in particular, was that the business analyst and the technical leads were hired during COVID and told that they were remote employees. And they took that very strictly and never wanted to come to site. And in particular, our lab teams were telling them, you don't understand, I can't operate this way. You're giving me this process, I work like this. They wouldn't come, they wouldn't work with our teams. And that's been like our system and our deployment that's had the most challenges. People just didn't feel heard. The processes kept having to hit the brakes. We need one more sprint. This isn't gonna work, because you just didn't have that human connection to know either why you want me to work differently and why you think it's okay, or make the change, because we just have to do these 3 extra steps for how we operate and what our quality teams are requiring for us. We need to really make people understand and feel that they understand our current process. So a little picture of the process diagrams up there. making sure we see the puzzle, we're solving the right pain points, not just what we presume based off of, well, every other company has needed to do it in this particular way, so you must also. But no, why might we need to operate a little bit differently? Maybe we're not special and we shouldn't, and we have to have that conversation and get people to come along for the ride. But in other cases, maybe we do need to make sure that we have that flexibility and agility for clinical operations. And what can we do in our process to actually be able to deliver in that way? A key point has also been, throughout all these different processes, figuring out through all the different engagements, who are your champions? Who are the people who get it? And they don't have to be the most technology smart, but if they are folks who are a little bit dynamic, the team has somebody who they're a go-to, they're kind of a happier personality, somebody who's a little bit more energetic and people are drawn to them. Having those folks as your champions is going to help to bring the rest of the team along. Have somebody that you feel like you can go to, they can ask questions. Even if they don't have the answer themselves, they can connect you with somebody else who does. But it just brings that comfort level. So for the projects that have worked really well, we've had change champion networks. For that one that I mentioned where the BA wouldn't come to side and we have more struggles, we're finally getting those champion networks in place to try to course correct for some of these challenges. But it's definitely been a lesson learned that's been highly effective to have these change champion networks provided with some communication materials, a little extra training. They're ready to go and help others kind of see the value of what's happening. It's really important for people to feel like someone who gets me is telling me this is important. And so I've just put that much more faith in what's happening. All right, and I just want to hit on as well the upskilling piece of it, because this does come with some new skills required. It's not just updating a Word document anymore, but I have to go into a system with a workflow, and I have to enter configuration parameters in 3 different screens. And that type of skill training is obviously very important. And so making sure that we have well-built trainings for our teams is invaluable. So how do people want to learn? And so maybe this isn't just PDF SOPs that they have to follow step by step. We have some in-person trainings. We have little videos that help people to understand. And just like everybody likes to go to YouTube, why not use those types of approaches and quick snippets on how to execute within the systems? Paying attention to how people want to learn and using those approaches for upskilling has been helping our teams as well. And we have to look at who on our teams is coming along for the journey as well. So just because somebody maybe used to write the batch record, if they are not getting to that comfort level with the new system, we've had to kind of shift people around and just tap into the right skills, look at how we kind of revisit aligning the right skills and roles within our teams to make sure that we can be successful in this way. We don't have a head count to spare, and it's not like we're going to let people go just because they don't get it, but we just have to be a little bit smarter in how we deploy the people we do have. And then the data piece is incredibly important to all of our teams. And so there is kind of the today's skill building aspect of this, some of the basics of data literacy. We talk about data quality that comes from our teams knowing why is data important. So even as I'm just having to enter my data into this new workflow, if I understand a little bit of how I use the data at the end of the day, if I understand the bigger picture of how it's used, then I can be a little bit more thoughtful. And when it was on paper, it didn't really matter. Someone's transcribing it anyway. But when it's in a digital system and I want to be able to run this trend on the data later, if I need to be able to create a report on it later, it has to be consistent. Just making sure that our teams understand that mindset of the bigger picture goes a long way towards the value we're also getting out of the programs. So it's the data literacy just in the skill building at the system level, and then at the grander picture. And it's still part of the vision as well, and the selling and getting people to come along, but establishing that data culture aspect of where are we headed with data? Isn't AI cool and how we can use it? And just getting people to think about the big picture of kind of what's important to our teams. This is an important aspect to factor into the overall program. So it's not just a system deployment, but it's also a data capture deployment. And one other aspect, and we've actually partnered with Malcolm and the IAAE team on, is more of an education program. So we have the specific skill building, but we want to build for tomorrow. We want our teams to not just have transformation happening to them, But we want them. Our operators, our scientists, people closest to the process know what's working and what's not. And I know you all know that as well. What we want to do is to empower them to communicate a little bit more clearly, to recognize an idea of, hey, this is probably a problem I could solve because I've started to learn about what new technologies are out there. Or even some of the basics with the education program that let our technicians, our quality teams, different facilities and operations just come together and learn, how does a pump operate? What is PAT and what are some of the analytical tools and what are the basics? And what is data integrity? It just lets people ask better questions. Going through the education program helps people to talk the same language. So if we have investigations to work through, the teams have a little bit of a basis of knowledge that's shared. We look to this program and the education aspect, both for our day-to-day operations and for this knowledge building to work towards the future. All right, and just to sell this a little bit further, because it's easy to say that all this work that goes into the people part is worthwhile, but the numbers hopefully really start to sell it. And so there is a McKinsey study, there's I think many studies out there that talk about the value of organizational change management, where organizational change management is one slice of overall human-centric approach and design. But that OCM, when effectively done, can increase your ROI by 143%. And not having OCM, you can actually only have an ROI that's at 35%. Imagine deploying a system, people weren't involved. You tell them you're going to do it this way now. Nobody wants to use it. They don't change their ways of working. We're not going to see value out of something that nobody's actually turning on and logging into. And just a few examples from our own experience. So we do have warehouse barcoding. We didn't have this before. We had labels that were handwritten and stuck onto all of our drums and materials. So that alone is saving over a day per batch by implementing MES. We're not even at electronic batch records yet. We have electronic logbooks and we have weigh and dispense operations that have moved digital. That alone, just reducing all the calculations by not having to run around the site to find the stupid paper logbook to write down what you did. That's saving over 4 days per batch for our teams. Scheduling tools. This one had some adoption challenges as well, but we've really turned the corner and gotten people to understand the value in entering the start and stop times of their operations. We're starting to build up all the knowledge and dashboards to have proper capacity planning for our site so we can open up more opportunities for more clinical batches. We haven't quite calculated the ROI on this one, but it is one of the biggest sellers of the program overall. Because our management wanted to know, like, how can I get more out of your site? And this is our way of gathering that data. And we also have some pretty cool tools for digital parts search and management that have some underlying AI capabilities to let us search all of the engineering documentation and drawings and electrical drawings and do all kinds of cross-references for our CMMS system. And so this system has been an enormous time savings. Continuous manufacturing has nearly 3,000 parts. You disassemble, clean everything, put it back together. If you have a single gasket left over, that's a problem. And knowing where it belongs and how to recognize it, this system has a way of using visual recognition and the weight of that part to tell you where it possibly could belong in the system. And so being able to do that quick tracking and referencing and troubleshooting has helped us to reduce that change of line time from 19 days down to 8 days, which is an enormous savings. And so lastly, I mentioned we had some trouble with the labs. So in the individual processes where we can measure the improvements, each process we can be saving over 50% amount of time when it's used consistently across the sites, but the adoption uptake just isn't there yet. We're putting in those change champion networks. We're looking at how we get the right stakeholder engagement, get the right teams with the right mindset to really pick this up and make sure that it's delivering where it needs to deliver. But in all the other areas where we had strong OCM and engagement, we're really getting kind of maximum value out of our systems already. All right, and last slide, I promise. Hope I'm not going too long here. But just wanted to wrap up by sharing. Vertex, we do have this culture of innovation. We move fast. We're trying to leverage that into our transformation as well. it's really hard to move fast when we're changing so many things, but we try to use that mindset and that culture to pull our people along quickly and be able to see the vision of where we're headed. We do want to make sure that our manufacturing teams don't get lost in the story of Vertex R&D and how all the money goes back into R&D when we're manufacturing. Are we R&D? We need to make sure that our teams really understand and see that vision of how we're part of the puzzle and part of the pipeline delivery, and just make sure that our leaders are consistent in that story as well. So some things that we continue to face and need to grow on are how we use data in our processes, continue to grow that data culture. We need to sustain our operations in how we leverage our data, but we also need to sustain operations on these new systems. It's exciting to do a project, to roll it out, but we also make sure our teams have the mindset of, this is my new job and this is how I operate going forward. And as small deviations and changes and enhancements come along, I need to be able to balance that and give people the space to grow with the system and settle into that new role while still rolling out the next functionality that they're supporting the new projects also. And then on that data piece, we are still growing in our intentionality with the data analytics. Right now, we're gathering a lot of data with these new systems, which is fantastic. Lots of ideas for dashboards and where we head. But this is a place where we're also looking for kind of that highest up, top-down vision that's more than just like, wouldn't it be cool if AI did X, Y, Z, but really something more intentional so we can really start to focus our teams in how we use our data. All right, so I will wrap up there so we can hand off to the next. Thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you, Rachelle. That was very insightful. So you may be wondering, okay, what if I would like to go down, or my organization, how could they go down a similar path? There are some frameworks, and Malcolm Jeffers will come up next to share that with us. He works at the intersection of automation technologies and individuals and the companies who benefit society by working with them. He's got a background in electronic engineering and social sciences, unlike the rest of us in the audience. And that really does give him a fresh perspective, a different perspective on the purpose of technology for human good. So he is the transformation strategist and head of research for the International Academy of Automation Engineering. And he has truly been instrumental in driving transformative transformation strategies, executive coaching, workforce development, and much more. So let's welcome Malcolm up here.
Hello, everyone. It is so good to be with you. I'm tremendously excited to share what are, I believe, great ideas from other people that I get to listen to and then share with you. So that's why I really enjoy what I do. And I want to say thank you to Jim, to the ARC team for inviting myself, Rachelle, and you're going to hear from Paige Kane also, because believe it or not, the people that are on my right here, I see them as true leaders in the field in the life sciences. And you're going to really enjoy, I know, when she comes to speak in a few moments as well. Can I just say, some of you are going to go back home and some of your family are going to ask, so what were you up to in Orlando? And you'll have all sorts of answers. I saw a raccoon earlier. You can tell them that you saw a raccoon. One of the things you could say to them is, I heard from someone who works at a company who have produced a new pain medicine by studying people who walk on coals and their pain responses. You probably saw that picture earlier. Probably you wondered, why is that picture in there? Now, the science on which this new medicine breakthrough has been produced, they've studied people who have either extreme reactions to heat or the ability to not feel pain in their extremities. And through amazing 20 years or more of painstaking, literally, research, have produced this kind of medicine. It is a phenomenal breakthrough. So this is the kind of company and person you're hearing from in Rachelle. And I want to, on the theme of 20 years, ask you all a question. In 20 years' time, how many of you would like to attend a reunion with the people you work with right now? Yeah? I'm glad my colleague McKay has put up her hand. That's a good sign. I'll share with you about the answer to that question with some of the people that we asked in a study recently a little later. 20 years, this is my favorite quote of all time, 20 years experience is not 20 years experience if it is repeated 20 times without reflection. I hope what you've heard from Rachelle, what you'll hear from Paige, and what you'll hear in this study will be really inspiring and cause you to reflect on this in a way that as the days, weeks, and months go on, that you'll really get a lot of benefit from. So why am I here to talk to you today in particular?